Today, we're going to do a little tattooling. And yes, that's an actual thing. That's coming up. Hello, everyone. My name's Daniel Reach. This is Weaver Leather Supply. Today, I get to introduce one of the most unique tools that's hit the leather hobby in a very long time. Weaver Leather Supply has partnered with 21 Grams to bring you the Leather Tattooling Machine. And essentially what this is, it's a tattoo machine that's been adapted so that it works with leather. Now, before we jump into the project, I want to show you what actually comes with the kit. First, the packaging on this thing is absolutely beautiful. Then, on the inside, you get the instructions. Get a piece of leather to practice on. A Type-C charger. The machine itself. And 3 tips. Those tips are a thin liner, a thick liner, and a shader. So how does this thing actually work? Well, this is the machine. This is the tattooling machine. And you've got 3 different tips. And these drop right down in the end of it. There's only one way that they're going to go in. And then you give it just a little bit of a twist just to make sure that it doesn't come out. With the thing vibrating, sometimes it can work free. But that little bit of a twist will lock it in place so that shouldn't happen. From there, you can adjust this top part. And what that's going to do is it's going to adjust how much of the needle is exposed on the end. Now, I just said needle. This thing is not like a tattoo machine where this is designed to penetrate skin. It's actually fairly blunt on the end, so you don't have to worry about that. But that's the most accurate word I can think of for the tip right here. Now, on the other end of it, we have our power button and we have a plus minus sign. That's going to run your voltage up or down. And the higher the voltage, the faster that needle's going to move. The faster it moves, the smoother, cleaner of a line you get. The lower you adjust it, the slower it moves, and you get more of a stippling effect. And both of those can be really good. It just depends on the effect that you're looking for and the scenario that you're working with. So since this is my first time actually getting to use one of these things and you're literally seeing me figure it out in real time, I picked a pretty simple pattern. This is the one that we're going to be using right here. It's a fairy sitting on a branch. You can see her hair and her dress are kind of curling around her and she's in silhouette. That's going to give us the chance to use a couple of different techniques to create a few different textures. So I'm going to start with the thin liner, and I'm going to use that to go around the fairy and around the tree branch that she's sitting on. So using the liner was actually really simple. It was pretty easy and pretty intuitive to use. I'm going to be talking more about that later in the video, and we're going to do a whole nother video on tips and tricks. This video is primarily about introducing you and me, for that matter, to the tool and kind of seeing what it can do. We're going to get into some tips and tricks in the next video. Next up is going to be the shading tip. And this one is a little different than the other two. Instead of having just a single needle coming out the end of it, it's got 3 different ones. And that's going to allow us to create a few different textures. For the silhouetted part of the project, I'm going to go in and work in small little circles to give us a little bit of a mottled texture. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't use this texture for a silhouette because silhouettes are flat. They don't have texture to them. But this gives us a good idea of how you could use it for backgrounding. Now, this would be a great way to go around a design and add texture to the background. As you work across the leather, you're going to get different textures based on how heavy of a touch you use. From what I've found, a lighter touch is almost always going to work better. Once I've got that done, I'm going to go back with a wide liner. So we've got 2 liners. We've got the thin and then the thicker one. I'm going to take that wider, thicker one and go back and start working in some of these branches. One of the things I really like about these tips, the liner tips, whether it's the thin one or the thick one, it's a lot like using a pencil or a pen. It's very intuitive because we've all used something similar to that. Once I've got that done, I'm going to go back with my shader tip, but this time, instead of working in small little circles, I'm going to go back and create a stippling effect by very lightly bouncing those 3 needles on the surface of the leather. One last run with that fine tip to add in some of the details, and after that, we're ready to add color. For the color, I'm just gonna keep it simple. Just some Phoebing's dark brown antiqued over the leather, no sealer, just wipe it off immediately. So that looks really good. The antique settled down in those lines really nicely, but we didn't really get a silhouette effect like we're looking for. So I'm gonna go back with a paintbrush and Phoebing's Pro Dye. I'm using black, and we're gonna paint that silhouette in so we get that look that we're going for. From here, I'm gonna go back in and add some white highlights, but I don't want really stark, harsh white highlights. So I'm gonna mix equal parts Too Thin, so Angelus Too Thin with Angelus White. That's gonna make that white more transparent and make it where it doesn't just like jump off the page at you. So let's get into kind of what my thoughts are after using it for the first time and using it on a fairly minor project. And I thought the best way to approach this would just be by asking questions. And I know one of the very first questions you're going to have is this a good alternative? In other words, is it going to replace traditional tools and traditional techniques? And the answer to that, I think, is maybe. And let me I know it's a politician's answer. Let me give you a little bit more information on my thinking behind it. If we have a scenario where somebody has a hard time holding the tools, for example, arthritis. If we have a situation where you need to be quiet, maybe you live in an apartment or you have a small child in the house, in those scenarios, and maybe, a few others, I think this could easily replace traditional tools and techniques. But that being said, we need to be aware of the fact that it gives you a different look and a different effect. Now, that different look and different effect is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is different. So if we're going to be entering this piece into a competition where the judges are judging it based on traditional looks, well, that might work for you or work against you. It's hard to say. But my answer, will this replace traditional tools and traditional techniques? My answer is it could. Depending on the scenario, you just kind of need to think about what it is that you're going to be doing with the piece and the look that you're going for. So how about some things that surprised me about the machine and the effects that we were getting? Well, one of the things that surprised me was the fact that I was able to combine the swivel knife step and the beveling step into one step. Now, it looks slightly different. You can tell the difference, but it's essentially the same thing. So that was really nice to be able to combine the two of them. The other thing that surprised me is how small a detail I could work in to the project. So with that fine tip, I can get in some really small areas that would be difficult to get into with traditional tools. So the next question would be, who should use it? And I want to look at this question from the perspective of skill level, like on a 0, never done any leather work, all the way up to a 10, which would be like a grandmaster, somebody that's incredibly experienced. Who should be using this? Well, I think this tool is going to benefit everybody on that scale. It's just going to benefit you differently. If you're on the beginner side of it, and you're still learning to use a swivel knife, you're learning to use a bevel, this is something that maybe can get you to a little bit more advanced project while you're learning those skills. On the flip side of that, if you're an intermediate or advanced or very advanced craftsman, well, this is something that's going to expand your repertoire, your abilities. Somebody that's very beginner is going to use it very differently than somebody who's an expert. I really expect the people who are on the more advanced end of the scale to be using this for texturing, to getting in those really small areas that are really difficult to get into otherwise. So I really think this is something you should add to your kit, no matter where you're at on that skill. You're just going to use it differently on one end versus the other. And the last question, do I think you should add this to your kit? I know we've talked about this already, and you already know I'm going to say yes, but it's a qualified yes. And by that, I mean this is something you should absolutely have in your kit, but it should not be a crutch. You still need to know how to run a swivel knife. You still need to know how to use a bevel. This should enhance those skills, not replace them. So you're going to be seeing a lot of this in the upcoming videos. We've got tips and tricks videos to show you how to get specific techniques and effects. We're going to be using it in a lot of projects to really expand what we can do in those projects. But that's going to do it for this video. I will see you in the next one. In the meantime, go make something amazing.